My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 34 years old. And today I watched everything I thought I knew about my life crumble into 1,000 irreparable pieces. The morning started like any other Tuesday in our suburban Denver home. Coffee brewing, kids rushing around getting ready for school, my husband David scrolling through his phone at the breakfast table. But beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect routine, something had been festering for months, maybe years, and I was too blind or too scared to see it. The first crack appeared when I found the credit card statement tucked behind our family. Photos on the mantelpiece. $23,000 in charges I didn't recognize. Hotels and cities David claimed he'd never visited. Restaurants where he'd apparently dined while telling me he was working late. My hands trembled as I traced each line item, each lie, each betrayal documented in cold, hard numbers. The coffee mug slipped from my fingers, shattering against the kitchen floor just as my world was shattering around me. David looked up from his phone, annoyed at the noise, completely unaware that his carefully constructed deception was about to unravel. The fragments of ceramic scattered across the tile seemed to mirror the fragments of trust now scattered across my heart. I stood there, frozen, holding the evidence of his betrayal while our children ate their cereal, oblivious to the storm, brewing in their mother's chest. This was the moment everything changed. This was the day my family broke apart, and I didn't even know the worst was yet to come. The silence stretched between us like a chasm filled only by the sound of my daughter, Emma asking for more orange juice, and my son Jake complaining about his upcoming math test. Normal morning sounds that now felt surreal, like hearing laughter at a funeral. I waited until the kids left for school before confronting David, my voice barely above a whisper. I slid the credit card statement across our kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared thousands of meals, made countless plans, dreamed about our future together. He glanced down at the paper, and I watched his face transform. The color drained from his cheeks, his jaw tightened, and for a split second, I saw something I'd never seen before in my husband's eyes. Fear. But then came the lies. Oh, the elaborate, desperate lies. Business trips that required personal accommodations because company bookings fell through. Client dinners that ran so late they necessitated hotel stays. Each explanation more convoluted than the last, delivered with the kind of conviction that made me question my own sanity. For a moment, I almost believed him. After 15 years of marriage, part of me desperately wanted to believe him. That's when my phone buzzed. A text from my sister-in-law, Rebecca, David's own sister. Sarah, we need to talk. Can you meet me for coffee? It's about David and it can't wait. My blood turned to ice. Rebecca had always been protective of her brother, sometimes to a fault. If she was reaching out to me with concerns about David, something was terribly, irreparably wrong. David saw me reading the message. The remaining color drained from his face, and he grabbed for my phone. In that moment of desperation, of reaching across our kitchen table to snatch my phone from my hands, he became a stranger to me. The man I'd fallen in love with in college. The father of my children, the person I trusted with my entire life, had become someone I didn't recognize. His fingers closed around empty air as I pulled my phone back, and we stared at each other across a distance that felt infinite. I drove to the coffee shop in a daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had turned white. Every red light felt like an eternity. Every familiar street corner seemed foreign. The world outside my car window looked exactly the same as it had an hour ago, but everything felt different, distorted, like looking at life through a broken lens. That Rebecca was already waiting when I arrived, her usually perfect composure cracked around the edges. She'd been crying, mascara slightly smudged beneath her eyes despite her obvious attempts to repair the damage. We'd always gotten along well, but we weren't particularly close. She was David's family, not mine, and there had always been an invisible boundary between us that we'd never quite crossed. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I should have told you months ago, but I kept hoping David would come to his senses and end it himself. The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. And what? And what exactly? But I already knew. Deep down, in that place where wives store their unspoken fears, I already knew. Her name was Victoria, a colleague from David's consulting firm. Rebecca had seen them together at a restaurant across town, holding hands, looking at each other the way David used to look at me. When she confronted her brother, he'd begged her to stay silent, promised it was just a phase, swore he'd end it, and recommit to our marriage. That was 4 months ago. 4 months. 4 months of lies, of him coming home to our bed after being with her. 4 months of family dinners where he sat across from our children, pretending to be the devoted father, while living a double life. 4 months of me cooking his favorite meals, planning our summer vacation, discussing Emma's college applications, completely unaware that our entire marriage had become a performance piece for his benefit. The drive home felt like traveling through a nightmare. Every house in our neighborhood looked the same as always, but I felt like an alien observing a world I no longer belonged to. The white picket fence we'd installed last spring, the garden we'd planted together, the swing set where our children had spent countless hours playing. All of it felt like stage props in someone else's life. David's car wasn't in the driveway. Of course it wasn't. He was probably with her right now, explaining how his wife had found out, strategizing their next move. The thought made me physically ill. I sat in my car for several minutes, staring at our front door, unable to force myself to walk into what used to be my sanctuary and now felt like a crime scene. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. The broken coffee mug still lay scattered across the kitchen floor where I'd left it, a perfect metaphor for the destruction that had begun with such a simple discovery. I knelt down and began picking up the pieces, each shard sharp enough to draw blood, just like the memories now cutting through my mind with surgical precision. How long had I been living in denial? The late nights that became more frequent. The way he'd started password protecting his phone. The business trips that seemed to multiply. The subtle emotional distance that I'd attributed to work stress, midlife crisis, anything but the truth. I'd been so busy managing our household, raising our children, maintaining the illusion of our perfect suburban life that I'd failed to notice my husband disappearing right in front of me. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the realization of how completely I'd been deceived. Every I love you over the past 4 months had been a lie. Every family photo, every shared laugh, every intimate moment had been contaminated by his deception. I wasn't just losing my husband, I was losing my entire sense of reality. Asterisk. The kids came home from school full of their usual energy, backpacks flying, voices overlapping as they told me about their day. Emma, our 16-year-old, was excited about making the varsity soccer team. Jake, 13 and perpetually hungry, was already rifling through the refrigerator before his backpack hit the floor. Watching them, so innocent and unaware, broke my heart in ways I didn't know were possible. How do you tell your children that their father, their hero, the man who taught them to ride bikes and helped with homework and attended every school play, has been living a lie? How do you explain that the family they've always known, the stability they've counted on, was built on deception? The words felt impossible, too heavy and destructive to speak aloud. I made their after-school snacks with shaking hands, listened to their stories about teachers and friends and weekend plans, all while feeling like I was watching them through thick glass. They seemed so far away, even though they were right there in our kitchen, even though nothing in their world had changed yet. But everything in their world was about to change, and they had no idea. David came home at his usual time, carrying flowers, grocery store flowers, the kind you buy when you're desperate and guilty and grasping for redemption. He walked into our kitchen with that bouquet like a peace offering, like yellow roses could somehow undo months of betrayal. The audacity of it, the sheer insulting audacity, made me want to scream, but the kids were there, homework spread across the dining room table, the television playing in the background, the ordinary soundtrack of our family life continuing as if the world hadn't shifted on its axis. So I took the flowers, put them in water, and began preparing dinner like I had thousands of times before, all while feeling like an actress who'd forgotten her lines in the middle of the most important performance of her life. Dinner was excruciating. David attempted normal conversation, asking about the kids' day, discussing weekend plans, pretending everything was fine while I sat there knowing everything about him was false. Emma talked about her upcoming soccer tournament. Jake complained about his history teacher, and David played the role of engaged father with Oscar-worthy performance. I kept waiting for him to crack, to show some sign of guilt or remorse, but he maintained his facade perfectly. When Emma asked if we could all go to her tournament together as a family, he enthusiastically agreed, even suggesting we make a whole day of it. Maybe grab dinner afterward? The casual cruelty of it, planning family activities while actively destroying our family, left me speechless. After dinner, David tried to corner me in the laundry room. "We need to talk about this morning," he whispered urgently, glancing toward the living room where the kids were watching television. "I can explain everything, Sarah. It's not what you think." But his explanations had already proven worthless. Rebecca's revelation had stripped away any possibility of innocent interpretation. I folded towels mechanically, keeping my hands busy so I wouldn't have to look at him. "Not here," I managed to say, "not with the kids home." He nodded, relief flooding his features. He actually looked relieved, as if postponing the conversation might somehow make the problem disappear. As if time might heal wounds that hadn't even been properly acknowledged yet. That night, we lay in bed like strangers. David fell asleep almost immediately, probably exhausted from maintaining his performance all day. I lay there listening to him breathe, studying his face in the darkness, trying to reconcile this man with the husband I thought I knew. His features looked the same, but everything about him felt foreign now. The person sleeping next to me was a stranger wearing my husband's face. I didn't sleep. Instead, I spent the night staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through 15 years of marriage, searching for clues I'd missed, signs I'd ignored. The business trip to Chicago last month when he'd been unreachable for entire afternoons. The new cologne he'd started wearing. The way he'd become protective of his phone, taking it with him even to the bathroom. How many lies had I swallowed? How many times had he looked me in the eye and lied with perfect sincerity? The questions multiplied in the darkness, each one more painful than the last. I felt like a detective investigating my own life, uncovering evidence of crimes I'd been too trusting to notice. By morning, I'd made a decision. I waited until David left for work and the kids left for school, then I called my lawyer. Margaret Chen had handled our will and estate planning, but I knew she also handled divorces. Her voice was kind but professional as I explained the situation, my words coming out in broken fragments between tears I couldn't suppress. "Sarah, I need you to gather financial documents," she said gently. "Bank statements, credit card bills, investment accounts, everything you can find. And don't let David know you're doing this yet. We need to understand the full scope of the situation before we make any moves." Her words made it real in a way that even Rebecca's revelation hadn't. I was preparing for divorce. After 15 Years of marriage. I was preparing to dissolve the life we'd built together. The rest of the day passed in a blur of gathering documents and making copies. I felt like I was dismantling my own life, piece by piece, preparing to divide up the remnants of what had once been a family. Every shared bank account, every joint investment, every financial decision we'd made together now had to be examined through the lens of betrayal and deception. David came home that evening with another peace offering, takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant. He remembered I loved their pad Thai, and for a moment, that small gesture of consideration made me want to cry. It would have been easier if he were completely thoughtless, if I could hate him cleanly and completely. But the man who had betrayed me was also the man who remembered my favorite noodles dot. The kids were thrilled about the unexpected treat. We sat around our dining room table, eating from cardboard containers, and for brief moments, it almost felt normal. Almost. David kept glancing at me, trying to gauge my mood, probably wondering if his strategy of pretending everything was fine might actually work. After dinner, he suggested we watch a movie together as a family. We settled into our usual spots in the living room, Emma curled up in the corner of the couch, Jake sprawled on the floor with his back against my legs, David in his recliner. It was a comedy, something light and meaningless, but I couldn't focus on the screen. Instead, I found myself memorizing this moment, storing it away like a photograph. This might be one of our last evenings together as a family. Soon, there would be custody schedules and separate homes and holidays divided between parents. The kids were laughing at something on the screen, completely unaware that their world was about to fracture. I wanted to freeze time to preserve their innocence just a little longer. When the movie ended, Emma hugged me goodnight and told me she loved me. "I love you too, sweetheart," I whispered into her hair, holding her just a beat longer than usual. Jake gave me his customary quick hug and headed upstairs. David lingered, clearly hoping for some sign of forgiveness or reconciliation, but I couldn't give him what he wanted. Not anymore. The confrontation came the next evening. I'd spent the day with Margaret, going over documents, learning about asset division and custody arrangements, preparing for a future I'd never wanted to imagine. When David walked through our front door, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a manila folder full of evidence spread out before me. He stopped in the doorway, seeing the papers, understanding immediately that his time was up. The mask, finally, slipped from his face, revealing the exhaustion and resignation beneath the facade he'd been maintaining. He looked older somehow, diminished, like a deflated balloon after a party's over. "How long has it been going on?" I asked quietly. The kids were upstairs doing homework, and I kept my voice low, still protecting them even in the middle of destroying their world. David sat down across from me, the same spot where he'd lied about the credit card charges, and for the first time in days, he told me the truth. 8 months. 8 months of secret meetings and stolen weekends and elaborate deceptions. It had started innocently, he claimed, just professional collaboration that turned into friendship that somehow became something more. He tried to explain the progression, as if understanding the mechanics of his betrayal would somehow make it hurt less. "I never meant for this to happen," he said, and I almost laughed at the cliché of it. Did anyone ever mean for their affairs to happen? Did they stumble into hotel rooms by accident, accidentally delete incriminating text messages, accidentally lie to their spouses for months on end? "But you chose it," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Every day for 8 months you chose her over us. You chose deception over honesty. You chose to destroy our family." The words hung in the air between us like a verdict, final and irreversible. David tried to salvage what couldn't be saved. He promised to end the affair immediately, begged for counseling, swore he'd do anything to repair our marriage. But his Words felt empty now, just more sounds from a mouth that had already proven untrustworthy. I'd heard his promises before, his declarations of love, his vows of commitment. They'd all been worthless. "I've already seen a lawyer," I told him, and watched his face crumble. The reality of consequences was finally sinking in. This wasn't going to be a temporary crisis we'd worked through together. This was the end of us. The end of everything we'd built. The end of the future we'd planned. He asked about the children, his voice breaking on the word children. That's when I started crying, really crying, for the first time since this nightmare began. Because thinking about Emma and Jake, about having to explain why Daddy wouldn't be living with us anymore, about splitting their time between two homes, about all the ways this would damage them, was almost unbearable. "They don't know yet," I managed to say through my tears. "I wanted to talk to you first, to figure out how we're going to handle this." Even in my anger, even in my heartbreak, I was still trying to protect our children, still trying to minimize the damage his choices would cause them. David reached across the table like he was going to take my hand, then thought better of it. The gesture, incomplete and uncertain, perfectly captured the distance between us now. We were still married, still living in the same house, still sharing the same last name, but we'd become strangers. The intimacy we'd built over 15 years had been shattered by his betrayal, and I didn't know if it could ever be repaired. We agreed to wait until the weekend to tell the children, giving us both time to figure out how to explain the unexplainable. Those 3 days felt like living in purgatory, maintaining normalcy while everything beneath the surface was chaos. David slept in the guest room, claiming he had a cold and didn't want to disturb my sleep. The kids accepted this explanation without question, the way children do, trusting their parents to tell them the truth. I found myself studying Emma and Jake with new intensity, memorizing their faces, their voices, their little habits and quirks. Emma's way of twirling her hair when she was concentrating on homework. Jake's unconscious humming while he played video games. These small, precious details of their daily existence would soon be divided between two households, shared custody, meaning I'd miss half of their moments. Friday night, David and I sat in our living room after the kids had gone to bed, planning what might be the most difficult conversation of our lives. How do you tell your children that their family is breaking apart? How do you explain adult failures to innocent hearts? We struggled to find words that would be honest but not too harsh, clear but not devastating. "We should emphasize that this isn't their fault," David said quietly, "that our problems have nothing to do with them." I nodded, though part of me wanted to tell him not to say our problems. This wasn't our problem. This was his problem, his choices, his betrayal that was destroying our children's security. But for their sake, I would take partial responsibility, would help him craft a narrative that preserved their relationship with their father, even as I was losing mine with my husband. Because children need their parents, even flawed ones, even parents who make terrible mistakes. Emma and Jake didn't deserve to lose their father just because I was losing my husband. Saturday. Morning arrived gray and drizzly, the weather matching my mood perfectly. We'd planned to have the conversation after breakfast, giving the kids a chance to wake up properly before delivering news that would change their lives forever. I made pancakes, their favorite weekend breakfast, as if normal food could somehow. Cushion abnormal news. Emma noticed the tension immediately. She had always been perceptive, even as a little girl, sensitive to the emotional undercurrents in our household. "Are you guys okay?" she asked, looking back and forth between David and me with growing concern. Jake was oblivious, focused on drowning his pancakes in syrup, but Emma's worried expression broke my heart. After breakfast, we asked them to join us in the living room. The formal request alarmed them both. Family meetings weren't common in our household, and they could sense something significant was coming. Emma sat on the edge of the couch, alert and anxious. Jake flopped down next to her. Still relaxed but beginning to pick up on his sister's worry, David and I had rehearsed this conversation. But when the moment came, all our careful words evaporated. I started crying before I even spoke, and Emma immediately knew something was terribly wrong. "Mom, what's happening?" she asked, her voice rising with panic. "Your father and I are having some serious problems," I began, my voice shaking despite my efforts to stay calm. "We've tried to work things out, but we've decided that we need to live apart for a while." The euphemisms felt dishonest, but the full truth seemed too brutal for their young hearts. Jake's face scrunched up in confusion. Live apart? Like Dad's going to move out? The reality was beginning to dawn on him, and I watched innocence drain from his features in real time. Emma started crying immediately, not the dramatic tears of teenage emotion, but the deep, silent tears of genuine grief. She understood more than Jake did, could read between the lines of our careful explanations. "Are you getting divorced?" she asked quietly, and the word hung in the air like a toxic cloud. David tried to answer, tried to explain that we were taking things one step at a time and seeing what the future holds. But Emma was too smart for those kinds of evasions. She looked directly at me and asked again, "Are you getting divorced?" "Probably yes," I said, because she deserved honesty, because she was 16 years old and capable of handling truth even when it was painful. "We're going to try to make this as easy as possible for both of you, but yes, we're probably going to get divorced." Jake's confusion turned to anger. "Why?" he demanded, looking back and forth between us. "What happened? Why can't you just fix it?" His questions were so reasonable, so innocent, and I didn't know how to answer them without destroying his relationship with his father. David stepped in, taking responsibility in the vaguest possible terms. He talked about growing apart, about making mistakes, about sometimes adults not being able to solve their problems. It was sanitized and incomplete, but it was enough for now. The children didn't need to know about Victoria, didn't need to understand the full scope of their father's betrayal. Emma asked the practical questions. Where would Dad live? Would they still see him regularly? What about holidays and birthdays and school events? Her maturity in the face of crisis made me proud and heartbroken simultaneously. She was handling this better than I was already thinking about how to navigate this new reality. The rest of that weekend passed in a blur of tears, questions, and tentative plans. David found a furnished apartment across town, close enough for easy custody exchanges, but far enough to give us both space to begin healing. The kids helped him pack, a surreal family activity that involved folding their father's clothes into boxes while pretending this was somehow normal. Emma oscillated between anger and sadness, sometimes snapping at both of us, sometimes crying. Quietly in her room, Jake seemed to be processing more slowly, asking the same questions repeatedly as if different answers might somehow change the situation. Both of them kept looking at David and me hopefully, as if we might suddenly announce. This was all a misunderstanding. Sunday evening, David loaded his belongings into his car while the kids and I watched from the front porch. 15 years of marriage reduced to boxes and suitcases, a lifetime of shared memories packed up and driven away in a single trip. The children hugged him goodbye, and I saw him crying for the first time through all of this. After he left, our house felt enormous and empty. Rooms that had always felt cozy now seemed cavernous. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of Emma crying in her bedroom and Jake repeatedly opening and closing the refrigerator as if looking for something that wasn't food. I sat in our living room, now my living room, and tried to imagine what came next. Single parenthood, custody schedules, selling this house, probably, and finding somewhere smaller, more affordable. Dating again someday, maybe, though that seemed impossible to contemplate. Building a new life from the rubble of the old one. The hardest part wasn't losing David. I realized the hardest part was watching my children lose their innocence, their sense of security, their belief that families stay together forever. That was the real casualty of his betrayal. Not just my heart, but their trust and the stability of love. The first few weeks of separation were brutal. The children struggled with the new routine, spending weekdays with me and weekends with David. Emma became moody and withdrawn, her grades starting to slip as she dealt with the emotional fallout. Jake developed trouble sleeping, coming into my room at night, asking if Daddy was coming home. I started therapy, partly for myself and partly to learn how to help the children navigate this transition. Dr. Rodriguez was patient and practical, helping me understand that healing wasn't linear, that some days would be harder than others, that rebuilding my life would take time and patience with myself, David, and I maintained civil communication for the children's sake, coordinating schedules and school events with painful politeness. He'd ended the affair with Victoria, he told me, claimed he realized what he'd lost and wanted to fight for our family, but it was too late for fighting. The trust was gone, shattered beyond repair. The divorce proceedings moved slowly through the legal system, each document and filing another step away from the life I'd known. Dividing our assets felt like performing surgery on our shared history. The house we'd bought together, the investments we'd made, even small items like books and kitchen appliances had to be categorized as his. Mine or ours. Some days I felt strong and independent, proud of how I was handling single parenthood and excited about the possibility of rediscovering myself outside of marriage. Other days I felt overwhelmed and lonely, missing the partnership and companionship that had defined my adult life. The emotional roller coaster was exhausting, but I was learning to ride it without falling apart completely. Friends and family rallied around us, offering support and practical help. My sister flew in from Seattle to help with the children during the worst of the transition. Neighbors brought casseroles and offered to carpool Emma to soccer practice. The community of support reminded me that even though my marriage had ended, I wasn't alone in the world. 6 months later, we found our new rhythm. Emma and Jake have adopted better than I expected, though they still have hard days when they miss the intact family we used to be. David remains an active father, and I've worked hard to support their relationship with him despite my own feelings about his choices. I've started dating someone new, a kind man named Michael who understands my priorities and doesn't rush me toward commitment I'm not ready for. The children like him, which feels like a small miracle. He doesn't try to replace their father, but simply adds warmth and companionship to our household when he's around. The house sold last month, and we're moving to a smaller place next week. Emma was sad about leaving her childhood home, but she's also excited about redecorating her new room. Jake is thrilled to be closer to his best friend's house. We're learning that change doesn't have to mean loss, that sometimes it means opportunity. I still feel angry sometimes about how our marriage ended, about the choices David made and the pain he caused our family. But the anger doesn't consume me anymore. It comes in waves now, manageable and temporary, rather than the constant burn it was in those first weeks. The children are resilient in ways that amaze me daily. They've learned that families can take different shapes, that love doesn't always last forever in the form we expect, but that doesn't mean it disappears entirely. We're still a family, just configured differently now. Looking back on that Tuesday morning when I found the credit card statement, I can see it was both an ending and a beginning. The ending of a marriage built on deception, yes, but also the beginning of a life built on truth. The day my family broke apart was also the day we began building something new, something honest, something real. And perhaps that's worth celebrating after all.